All right, welcome. I know I'm doing a live stream for Security Plus. We're in Domain 1.1 today. Domain 1.1. That's security control types, that kind of thing. We're gonna go over the categories. We're gonna go to control types. I figured I'd try it live this time. I don't know if I'm gonna set up a specific time frame or not, but definitely gonna have more than 5 questions. We're gonna try and cover as much of Domain 1.1 today as possible. That's the goal anyway. Let's just get started right into the chat, right into the process. Let's start with. Oh, let me move my picture over there. I know. I had it over to the side. Let's get started with question number one. The following firewall log was generated. What type of control is being used? What type of control is being used with this? We see our firewall log. We see it at 2024-1108. Action is blocked. Of course, we have that IP, that source IP address, and then it looks like it's using RDP. What type of control is being utilized? We have preventive, detective, corrective, and of course deterrent control. Do you remember from your studies what type of control is being used? Do we know what type of control is being used? I'll give you a few seconds on this one. We're gonna try and get through them. I know I don't normally do live, but let's see if we can't get into it. Right off the bat. All right. If you said, well, let's start with deterrent. We'll start with D, deterrent control. No, deterrent control is a sign. It's some type of action taken by the company, by the owner, to provide trying to deter you from taking an action. So we can see that with fire log, probably not a deterrent control. Corrective control. It could be a corrective control. We have the timestamp. We have a firewall. Firewalls could be utilized as a corrective measure. We can input a new rule in there and correct it. So possible. We have detective control. I like detective controls. They provide a log. And in this case, we actually see a log. So would it be corrective or detective control? Which one makes more sense? And then we have preventive, of course, as well. If I had to choose between A, B, or C, we have preventive control, detective control, and corrective control. I would get rid of corrective. Because I feel like firewalls actually provide us log. And we can see that firewall log right there. And so I think the log outdoes the corrective action. Corrective action being, of course, after an incident occurs. In this case, we see that the action was already blocked, and so not very much a corrective control. But we are seeing a log, and we are seeing the firewall there. So it's really between A and B on this one. What do you think? Between A and B, I would say if you had to choose between A and B, I would probably go with A. Why A and not B? Well, even though it is a log, right? Which if we were using logs and we were actually going through and logging it and going through the log to detect what happened, then that would be correct. But in this case, we see that it is successfully blocked. Since it's successfully blocked, then it's obviously a preventive control. There it is, preventive control. All right, moving on. Question number two. An analyst finds the following data entry in a security log. What type of control is being applied? We see the data transmission, encrypted AES-256, pretty standard, internal database server, and external backup storage. And so we're seeing the analyst finds the following data entry in a security log. What type of control is being implemented? We have directive, technical, corrective, and of course compensating on this one. What do you think? What do you think on this one? I know it's always difficult when we go through this. If I had to guess on this one, well, let's start with A, compensating control. We know that a compensating control provides us to compensate for an issue, compensate for a problem that we found, right? So if we had a legacy system that couldn't meet the minimum standard, we could go through there and we could add additional protections onto it. That would be a compensating control to bring it up to meet or exceed those standards. In this case, I don't think compensating control matches what we're doing here. We see data transmission is encrypted, we see the source, we see the destination, but that's it. And so I don't really see a problem with this one. I don't think it's going to be compensating control. Then we have corrective control. Corrective control would be a control after the fact. Something happens, something is wrong. That would be a corrective control. Corrective control would be that one where we have an issue and then we fix it. That would be a corrective control. Then we have a technical control and a directive control. Technical and then directive. Technical control is where we use technology to fix an issue, to control a problem, and then a directive control where we're being directed to do something. Well, obviously, if we're looking at that from C and D, it's going to be C. It's going to be C because we're using an encryption, we're using external backup storage, so definitely a technical control associated with it. We're using technology to control a problem. That would be a technical control. There we go. All right, question number 3. The following inventory report was generated. Which control is being utilized by maintaining a hardware inventory? And we see missing devices 3, action taken, reported to the security team. That is our aspect there. I'll give you about 15, 20 seconds on this one. What do you think? What do you think on this one? It's always when we go through this process, we have to think about it. I know. All right, let's answer this one. The following inventory report was generated. Which control is being utilized by maintaining a hardware inventory? I think let's start with a preventive control. I don't think an inventory actually prevents anything. I would say that probably not, right? Prevention, of course, being to prevent something from occurring, to prevent an action. In this case, we're not really seeing that, right? Corrective control, that means something happened and we fixed it. We corrected the problem. In this case, we have 3 missing devices, action taken, reported to the security team. Does reporting it to the security team correct the problem? Does it? Well, that's a maybe. That's a maybe. It might. And then we have C, compensating control. Compensating control, of course, being a control that we already discussed, where we compensate for a lack of security. I'm really not seeing that here, right? And so definitely not C. And then we have a detective control. Detective control, obviously going through to investigate the issue, investigate the problem, go through and see if we can't figure it out. That would be a detective control. So it's really between B and D on this one, B and D, corrective or detective control. Obviously, we see the inventory report generated. We see the control is being utilized by maintaining a hardware inventory. Is it a corrective control or is it a detective control? I'll give you another 5 seconds on this one before we answer. If you said corrective control, well, you'd be mistaken. You'd be mistaken. It's not a corrective control. It is actually a detective control. We have the 3 laptops taken, and we reported to the security team so they can detect or they can investigate the issue. That would be a detective control. I know it's a round the way to say it, but it is definitely the answer. There we go, detective control. You get one of them right? All right, question number 4. Your organization has started placing RFID tags on all laptops. When scanned, a recent report shows what type of control is RFID tagging. We see the RFID, we see the device ID, we see the status not detected in building. What type of control is an RFID? What type of control is RFID tagging? Directive, compensating, physical, or preventive, of course, are your possible answers on this one. What do you think? What do you think? I'll give you another 5 seconds before you come up with this one. Now remember, when we're going through Security Plus, when we're doing our exam, we really want to knock it down. We really want to do it very, very quickly. 30 to 45 seconds per question. We want that extra time to utilize on our PBQs, on our performance-based questions. All right. Your organization has started placing RFID tags on all laptops. When scanned, a recent report showed the following. What type of control is RFID tagging? Let's start with directive control. It could be a directive control, right? We could totally see where a manager could come in and direct us to do this. I like directive control. I'm going to put that in the maybe category. Compensating control, we're trying to compensate for problems. We've already answered what a compensating control is a couple times. No need to go back over that, but no, not going to be a compensating control. We have a physical control. The organization started placing RFID tags on all laptops, definitely a physical measure. When scanned, a recent report showed the following, not detected in building. Is it a physical control? Is it? Maybe. Maybe. Directive and physical, of course, are top 2 so far. And is it a preventive control? Does RFID tag prevent something from occurring? I would say no. I would say no, right? When you go through, maybe if the gate slams shut, like you went through a detector and all of a sudden the gate slammed shut in front of you to prevent you, maybe then. But in this case, it's just showing whether or not it's in the building or not. So probably not. So that would be A, directive, or C, physical are going to be our top 2 on this one. What do you think? I'll give you 5 more seconds on this one before we move on. What do you think? All right. If you said physical control, well, you would be correct. It is a physical control. Why is it a physical control? Well, it's not really applied to a directive control because we don't see directions. We're not seeing a manager in the question provide it. So by process of elimination, when we're looking at this, directive, compensating, preventive, or physical, it has no choice. It must be a preventive, or excuse me, a physical control. And it doesn't really provide a physical barrier, more so that it is a physical placement on the device, right? And so we kind of see that perspective. Is there a better answer? Oh yeah, there's 100% a better answer. 100%. Would I put physical control in my top? No. No, I would not. But this is CompTIA. This is CompTIA. They like pulling questions like that on you. Fully expects the type of question like that. That process of elimination, so important. So important when we're going through that. Physical control. All right, question number 5. An organization cannot implement full disk encryption on all endpoints due to hardware limitations. As an alternative, they enable file-level encryption for critical documents. What type of control is file-level encryption in this scenario? What do we think on this one? What do we think? I don't know. We got 4 good answers: directive, preventive, compensating, and detective control on this one. Really kind of have to read through this one. What do you think? Leave another 4 seconds on this one as you read through it. Pretty typical of CompTIA to provide big questions and kind of make you read through it. All right, let's answer this one. An organization cannot implement full disk encryption on all endpoints due to hardware limitations. As an alternative, they enable file-level encryption for critical documents. What type of control is file-level encryption in this scenario? Is it directive? Are we being directed to do something? No, it's not directive. We don't see a direction. We don't see where a manager is coming in and telling us to do something. That would be a directive control. Obviously not. Preventive control. I like a preventative control. I like preventive control because if you look through it, it's telling us as an alternative, right? So preventive, we're preventing from something occurring. It hasn't happened yet. We can't implement full disk encryption, but we can do this one instead. Preventive control, definitely in my top 2. Then we have compensating control. I like compensating as well because we had full disk encryption and then we couldn't do it. So we did this. And if you remember, compensating control is meet or exceed the problem. And so it could be compensating control. And then we have detective control. And detective control often associated with logs, auditing, that kind of thing. I'm not really seeing that here. Not really seeing any type of detection here. So it's really got between B and C, preventive versus compensating. What do you think? What do you think between B and C, preventive versus compensating control? What do you think on this one? That's a difficult one. What do you think? I would say if you answered C, compensating control, well, you'd be 100% correct. 100% correct. Why is it compensating control? We had an action, right? We cannot implement this full disk encryption. And so we're doing this instead. That is verbatim what a compensating control is. And so there you go. Compensating control. Question number 6. The access control system shows the following entry. What type of control is being used? We see a access control log, employee ID to the server room, see a timestamp, and then we see access was granted. Access was granted. What type of control? We have directive, detective, preventive, and compensating as our possible answers on this one. Always different to kind of go through and look at it from this perspective. For those that you're wondering, how many questions are actually on here? Well, quite a bit more than 5. I think I did 22 on today's little thing. I figured I'd do it live too, just kind of go through. I don't know how often I'll do live ones, right? But I really wanted to provide kind of a framework for this massive domain, and I think I'll continue to do that. I think I'll do domain-specific quizzes as we move through a little bit. We'll still do the 5, but I think we might go through and do all the domains. All right. Let's answer this one. The access control system shows the following entry. What type of control is being used on this one? We can see the access control log, employee ID, the location of the server, and we see a date timestamp associated with it. And of course, access was granted. Was it a directive control? No, we're not being directed. There's nothing in the question associated with direction. And so, not a directive control. A detective control. Well, we're using a log, and by definition, anytime we do an audit or a log, definitely detective control is a possibility. So definitely a top 2 on this one. Preventive control. Are we preventing something? Are we preventing something here? We see that the access was granted. Could the access be blocked? Is it possible to be a preventive control with access being granted? I'm going to put that in the maybe column. In the And then we have compensating control. Well, we learned from our last question, we did X and then the Y, or so on and so forth. In this case, we're not really seeing that. So our top two, detective and preventive, are going to be our possible answers. I'm going to give you 10 seconds on this one. What do you think? 10 seconds to look at this answer as we go through. What do you think? Detective versus preventive. If you answered detective control, I'm sorry, you would be incorrect. It is not a detective control. Why? Because it literally is access granted. We're seeing the log here, and it says the access control system shows the following entry. What type of control is being used? In this case, we see the server room, we see the access was granted, and of course, that would be access granted, but we could also block access, which would be a preventive control. Preventive is going to be our answer for this one. There it is. All right, question number 7. The organization has created an SOP for incident response. What type of control does this SOP represent? What is an SOP? We see our incident response. We need to identify the incident, contain the threat, eradicate and recover, and then document the incident for review. We have a 4-step process. What type of control is this? What is this? What do you think? Preventive, detective, corrective, or corrective? I'm going to shut my office door. One of the benefits of not being live sometimes is the ability to shut that door. My dogs go crazy in the background. Sorry about that. But that's okay. You understand when we go live like this. What do you think? All right, let's answer this one, shall we? Shall we put a thumb into this one? Let's do it, right? The organization has created an SOP, a standard operating procedure for incident response. What type of control does this SOP represent? We have incident response. All right, let's start with preventive control. Does an incident response provide a preventive control? I mean, it's before something happened, right? So I would say maybe on this one, big maybe. Let's go to detective control. Are we trying to detect something on here? Is there an investigation under process? I would say no. I don't think it's a detective control. I don't think so. Is it a directive control? Are we being directed to do something? Maybe. I like C. C's a good one. And the reason I say is because we have an SOP. We have a standard operating procedure. I would dictate this more of a managerial control than a directive control. But I don't see managerial as a possible answer. So directive is a decent answer. I like preventive as well. And then corrective control. Well, it created the SOP, but it doesn't say it created it in relation to an incident occurring. So it really doesn't make sense for it to be a corrective control. Preventive versus directive are our two top answers on this one. I'll give you another 5 seconds to figure out what you want to do with this one. Is it preventive or directive? What do you think on this one? What do you think? Well, if you said corrective, you would be incorrect. We didn't even do corrective. Oh my gosh, this is what happens when I look at my text messages. If you said directive control, directive control, you would be correct. It's corrective. Straight. Why not preventive? Well, we're not preventing anything. We're not preventing anything. We're doing a direction. We're doing directive. We're being directed by an SOP to do something, and that would be the indication of a directive control. That's going to be our answer on that one. All right, number 8. The organization's firewall blocks incoming traffic on port 23 telnet due to multiple unauthorized access attempts. What type of control is this? What type of control is this? For the organization blocks the incoming traffic on telnet due to multiple unauthorized access attempts. What do you think? What do you think? We have detective, preventive, compensating, and corrective as our possible answers on this one. Let's jump into it. Let's start with A, detective control. No logs, no audits, nothing like that. Can't be a detective control. No investigation. So I think we can safely get rid of that one. Preventive control. Are we preventing something? Yeah, we are. We're blocking a port. And so we see the organization's firewall blocks incoming traffic on port 23 due to multiple unauthorized access attempts. Well, firewalls are often preventive controls. Is it the best answer, though? Because it is being done due to multiple unauthorized access attempts. Maybe I'm going to put this in my top two. Compensating control. No, we don't see the firewall's we're not seeing where the firewall's not doing its job. And even if it was, we're not seeing something coming in to upscale it, right? To bring it up to another standard. That would be more of a compensating control. That's not happening here. And then we have corrective control. where we saw an issue and then we're correcting for it. Possible. We see the organization firewall blocks incoming traffic on port 23 due to multiple unauthorized access attempts. So we have these unauthorized access attempts, multiples of them. So X occurred and then we did this. That is almost per definition a corrective control, but is it better than preventive? Is it better than a preventive control? Yeah, I know the questions are getting harder, aren't they? And so it's really between B and D. I'll give you about 10 more seconds on this one. What do you think? B and D. B and D. This one. What do you think on this? Alrighty. If you said corrective control, I'm sorry, that would be incorrect. It is a preventive control. Why is it a preventive control and not a corrective control? Because I just stipulated that multiple unauthorized access attempts, so that happened and then we did this. So why isn't it a corrective control? Because it's blocking it. The firewall's doing it. We didn't tell the firewall to do it after the fact. It's just doing it. So the firewall's doing its job. And since it's doing its job, we didn't have to intervene. We didn't have to correct for that issue. And so there you go. It's going to be a preventive control right off the bat. All right. Moving on to question number 9. Hey, WC. All right. Question number 9. The security team has developed a new policy that outlines acceptable use of company-owned mobile devices. What type of control is creating and enforcing this policy? Of course, we have our 4 answers: technical, managerial, physical, and compensating control for this one. What do you think? What do you think on this one? We'll give you another 10 seconds on this one before we continue on. What do you think? I know all these great answers when we go into it. Now remember, when you're going through your exams, you've got that flag marker on the top right-hand side. No matter what happens, you got to answer the question. You got to for Security Plus. You need to answer that question. All right, shall we answer this one? The security team has developed a new policy that outlines it outlines the acceptable use of company-owned mobile devices. Sounds like an acceptable use policy, an AUP. What type of control is creating and enforcing this policy? Let's start with a technical control. Possibly, we are creating a new policy. Maybe a technical control. Maybe. All right. Then we have managerial control. Managerial usually outlines policies, procedures, and that kind of thing. And we can see here that a new policy is in works here. So managerial, I think, would be better than technical. I really do. Let's stick with B as our front runner for now. Then we have C, physical control. I'm not seeing gates. I'm not seeing fences. I'm not seeing anything like that. So probably not a physical control. And then, of course, we have compensating controls. Did something else occur? Did we see that an older policy kind of came in? And we do see it developed a new policy that outlines acceptable use. And it's bringing in a new policy. Does compensating control cover policies? Because we obviously had an old policy that wasn't functioning, and then we'll bring in a new policy. Is that the definition of a compensating control? It's really between B and D on this one. B and D, what do you think? I'll give you another 5 seconds to answer that before we move on. If you said compensating control, I'm sorry, it's a managerial control. Managerial or administrative controls handle all policies, procedures. Kind of give you a hint, kind of give you the answer beforehand. But B is going to be the correct answer on that one. There we go. Question number 10. Security analyst reviews system logs and notices multiple failed login attempts from the same IP address within a short period. What type of control is being utilized when reviewing these logs? We see a system log, admin, IP address, failed attempts, 15 failed attempts, and of course the action is none. What kind of control is this? What kind of control are we looking at in here? I'll give you another 10 seconds to answer this one. People often ask me, why are you being so quick? Why so quick? 30 to 45 seconds on these questions. These are actually pretty simple questions, comparatively speaking. And so I feel like you should get them pretty quick. And that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for that timeline. So remember, we want time to do our PBQs. We want those performance-based questions to be able to be answered. Let's start with A, corrective control. I think we can all agree it's not a corrective control, right? We all can kind of see that something didn't happen that required us to do something else. We don't see an incident occurred, and therefore, boom, this happened, so we're going to do this. We're seeing a log. We're seeing the failed login attempts, but we don't see an answer for that, so it cannot be a corrective control. Then we see preventive control. The security analyst reviews system logs and notices failed login attempts, but we're not seeing a prevention in place. Matter of fact, our action was none, even though we had failed attempts at 15. So I don't think it could be a preventive control. I don't think that's going to be correct. Then we see a compensating control being where we have one problem and then we compensate for the shortcoming. But we're not seeing that either, which means it must, by process of elimination, be D. It must be D, detective control. And that's a pretty obvious one. We see the system log. We don't see anything occurred. It's the only one that really makes sense. We're going to detect what's going on. That's our thing. Boom. D is going to be our answer. Look at those graphics, those high-speed graphics. Yep. All right, question number 11. Your intrusion prevention system generates the following alert. What type of control is the IPS providing in a scenario? We see a timestamp. We see a source IP, a destination, an alert, potential SQL injection detection, and action taken alert only. What kind of control is being done on this one? What do you think for question number 11? What do you think? You're probably thinking to yourself, oh, okay, I got this one. I got this one. Do you though? All right, give me another 5 seconds to answer this one. All right. Your network intrusion prevention system generates the following alert. What type of control is the IPS providing in this scenario? Let's start with corrective control. I think we know it's not a corrective control. I feel like corrective control is an easy one. We can get rid of that one. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and get rid of D. Let's get rid of D, deterrent control. It's not deterring anything. There's no signposted. That really leaves B and C, preventive versus detective control, are our top two front runners. Preventive versus detective control. What do you think on this one, B or C? I'll give you about 5 seconds on this one. Get those last minute answers in there. Well, if you said B, preventive control, you'd be incorrect. You'd be incorrect. And I know some of you are slamming your fists against the desk right now going, what? How is an IPS not a preventive control? Well, if it does its job, it is. But in this case, it's not. It's not doing its job because the action taken was alert only. And since it is an alert only, it's doing that of an IDS, not an IPS. That makes it a detective control. I know those sneaky little controls out there. That would make it a detective control. C. C. Yep. I know. Watch those. Watch those. Detective control. All right. Question number 12. The following report is generated after a recent vulnerability scan. What type of control is the deployment of patches? What type of control is the deployment of patches? We see our vulnerability scan report. We see a CVE for remote code execution. Affected systems are 5. Patch status is pending. Patch scheduled for deployment is our action. We have preventive, corrective, detective, and compensating. Compensating being our top answers on there. What do you think? I'll give you about 10 seconds on this one before we move on. Now, we got about 10 more questions after this one. I think I did 22 if I remember correctly. Yeah, 22 questions for today on this one. All right, let's answer this one. Following report is generated after a recent vulnerability scan. What type of control is the deployment of patches? Preventive. Is a patch a preventive control? I would argue that it's not. A preventive control is something done before something occurs, right? And so we see remote code execution. We see that problem. And so preventive control would be to prevent that from ever occurring. It already can occur, so it cannot be then a preventive control. Then we have a corrective control. Something happens and then we correct for it. Possible. Is a patch a corrective control? Is it a corrective control? Possibly. I like this answer. I do. Detective control. Something occurred and we need to log it. I'm not seeing logs. I'm not seeing an audit. We just see that a vulnerability scan report. Although we do have that scan report. We do have that scan report on there. Is the scan report a essence a log? Is it detection for us? Maybe. Maybe, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe. That would be B and C as our front runners so far. And then a compensating control. Is a patch a compensating control? I would argue that a compensating control makes more sense than a detective control. And the reason I say that is because we've got our CVE, right? We have that CVE. We know that this problem occurred when we need to bring it up to snuff. So compensating control makes more sense than a detective control. So our top answers are B and D. Corrective control and compensating control. What do you think on this one? What do you think? I'll give you about 5 seconds between those two. All right. If you said corrective control, well, I feel like I gave it away. But yeah, that's going to be the right answer. That's going to be it. It's going to correct the issue at hand. Look at those bouncy graphics. There we go. PC. All right, moving on. The endpoint protection system generates the following alert. What type of control is being demonstrated? We see that endpoint detection response, protection alert, excuse me. Trojan detected, we quarantined and removed, and it was on workstation 12. It was on workstation correct. What do you think? endpoint protection system generated the following alert. Is it a preventive, corrective, detective, or deterrent control? Think on this one. What do you think? Give you about 5 more seconds on this one before we answer this one. Alrighty, the endpoint protection system generates the following alert. What type of control is being demonstrated? Preventive control. I would say preventive control is definitely a front runner because we see endpoint protection alert. We see the Trojan was detected and then immediately quarantined and removed. And so we stopped it from occurring, right? So definitely a preventive control is a front runner. Then we have a corrective control. Did something happen and then we did this? Well, yeah, we saw that a Trojan was detected and then we quarantined and removed it. Definitely a corrective control. But is it a preventive control or is it a corrective control? Because we prevented it from taking hold, didn't we? And so it really comes between A and B. A and B so far. C, detective control. Are we detecting something? No, it's already been taken care of. So I think we can get rid of detective control. And then deterrent control, I feel like we can get rid of that one off the bat too. So it really comes between A and B on this one. A and B are going to be our front runners. Was it a preventive control or a corrective control? I'll give you about 5 seconds left on this one as we run through. And there we go. All right. If you said preventive control, I'm sorry, that would be incorrect. It is a corrective control. Why? Because the Trojan was detected, and as soon as it was detected, we quarantined it, and then we removed it. Had it been a preventive control, it never would have made it on the system in the first place. Then it would have been a preventive control. In this case, it's a corrective control. All right. Moving on, question number 14. Due to a delay in deploying multi-factor authentication, your organization restricts access to the network using IP whitelisting, or allow listing, I should say. What type of control is IP whitelisting in this context? What do you think? Is it a compensating, preventive, detective, or corrective control? I know, we're thinking about it. What do you think? I'll give you about 5 seconds left to kind of answer this question as we go through. All right. Due to delay in deploying MFA, your organization restricts access to the network using IP whitelisting. What type of control is IP whitelisting in this context? Is it a compensating control? Did we see that there was a delay in multi-factor authentication? But does that really constitute compensating control? Maybe. I'm going to go with maybe on this one. Is it a preventive control? Well, anytime we start whitelisting things or allow listing, that means that we're being very stringent on stuff. And since we're being very stringent, we're preventing something from occurring. And so I like preventive control. I really do. B is definitely a front runner as well. Detective control, we're not detecting anything. We're not seeing a detection. And then corrective control. Ooh, corrective control. Something happened, and so we did this to fix it. Another great answer. Really becomes between A, B, and C. Let's get rid of them. Let's get rid of one of them. I'm going to get rid of C. I'm going to get rid of corrective control. I'm getting rid of corrective control because something didn't happen, right? We just see that there was a problem, and then we wanted to prevent it from happening. Corrective control is after an incident occurs, and so we can get rid of corrective control. We can see that there wasn't a problem, and so, yeah, I feel like we can get rid of that. It really comes between A and B, preventive or compensating. Which one is the better answer on this one? I'll give you about 5 seconds on this before we move on. All right, if you said preventive control, you would be incorrect. It would be compensating control. Why? Because it was done in relation to something else. It would be done in something in relation to something else, right? We see a delay in deploying multi-factor authentication, so we couldn't do X, and since we didn't do X, we did Y. And since X equals Y, then it must be a compensating control, and there comes into play. So A is going to be our right answer on that. You must be on fire. You're getting a lot of these right. See the flame. All right, let's move on to question number 15. The incident response teams receives the following alert. What type of control is the automatic quarantine of an infected device? We see our SIEM alert, malware infection, endpoint IP address, and then quarantined automatically. We have detective, corrective, compensating, or deterrent control. My mind, when I looked at this, went straight to preventive control. That's not even a possible answer, but that's where my mind went on this one. Would it have been right anyway? Would it have been right anyway? You'll see this often with CompTIA exam questions where they give you this overarching thing, and then a lot of times the best answer isn't even an available answer. And so you have to come up with the second best, or sometimes the third best answer associated with it. I'll give you another 5 seconds to answer this question. What do you think on this one? All right, the incident response team receives the following alert. What type of control is the automatic quarantine of an infected device? Well, let's start with detective control. I feel like detective control is out the window. And the reason I say that is because it asks specifically what type of control is the automatic quarantine of an infected device. It's not asking about the logs. It's not. If it was asking about the logs, then it might be detective, but in this case, detective's not even in the front line. Corrective control. I like corrective control. We have a malware that was infected. We saw the endpoint, and then it was automatically quarantined. And so we had X, and then we had Y. And so I like corrective control. Was it compensating control? Compensating control would, of course, be where we had something occurred, and then we can't meet that, and so we did X instead. We're not really seeing that here. We're not really seeing this here. We see that the infection was detected, and then it was immediately quarantined automatically. Not really a compensating control on this one. And then we see a deterrent control. Deterrent control, of course, being where we take and we try to deter something from occurring. In this case, I don't think you can actually deter malware. I don't think malware can read signs. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I don't think so. That means B. B would be our correct answer. The only one that makes sense on this one. There we go. It's going to be B. All right, question number 16. Your organization has issued the following policy. What type of control is this policy? We see a security policy. All employees must complete annual cybersecurity awareness training. Non-compliance will result in access restrictions. And of course, we have directive, preventive, detective, and deterrent control. What do you think on this one? I'll give you about 5 seconds left to answer this one as we go through. All right, let's answer this one. Your organization has issued the following policy. What type of control is this policy? We see a security policy in place. Let's start with D, deterrent control. I like deterrent control. I do like deterrent control because we're trying to deter our employees from doing something they shouldn't be, which would be security awareness training, right? We want them to do that. Is that constitute a deterrent control? Maybe. D, probable answerable. I'll put that in my top 2. Detective control. Detective control. Is it a detective control? Are we detecting anything? There's nothing on here to suggest we are, so I'm going to get rid of that one. Is it a preventive control? All employees must complete annual cybersecurity awareness training. Non-compliance will result in access restrictions. Are we preventing them from accessing our network if they don't complete the training? Do I like preventive or deterrent better? I'm going to put both of those in my top 2 for now. And then we have directive control. With directive control, where we direct employees to do something, we direct them to handle something. Obviously, a directive control. Let's get rid of deterrent control. I feel like preventive makes more sense. So directive and preventive are going to be our top 2 on this one. A and B. I'll give you about 5 seconds on this one to answer this last little shindig right there. All right. If you said preventive control, you'd be incorrect. It is definitely a directive control. We are directing our employees to do something, right? The managerial or administrative control subset down to a directive control. Directive control obviously being where we direct our employees to do something. Kind of the definition of a directive control. And so there we have. It's going to be A. Going to be A. All right, question number 17. Your company has surveillance cameras installed on all entrances. The following footage was recorded. What type of control is this? We see the camera footage. We see a date and timestamp, and then we see an event unauthorized entry attempt caught on camera. What kind of control is this? What type of it? We have detective, preventive, deterrent, and corrective. Detective, preventive, deterrent, and corrective are going to be our answers for this question. What do you think? I'll give you about 5 more seconds to figure it out. Alrighty, your company has surveillance cameras installed at all entrances. The following footage was recorded. What type of control is this? Let's start with detective control. Are we really detecting something? Are we really detecting something with a video camera? I would say that a video camera usually is recording something. But I'll put it in my back pocket. We'll put it on the back pocket. Is it a preventive control? Last time I checked, preventive controls include something that actually prevents something from occurring. And unless that camera grows hands and arms and decides to stop somebody from entering or exiting the thing, I don't think that's going to be the case. Then we have a deterrent control. Do we deter people from accessing it? I would say that a camera a lot of times does deter people. People see a video camera or a sign or something like that, they could deter somebody. So A and C so far are our top 2 answers. And then D, corrective control. Corrective control being something occurs and we need to correct for it. Probably not in this case because we're just looking at camera footage, right? So it really comes between detective and deterrent control. Top 2 answers. I'll give you about 5 seconds on this one to answer those last minutes, just in case you answered B or D. What do you think? All right, if you said deterrent control, you'd be incorrect. I know I was misleading and I was conniving and I was mean. It is a detective control. It's 100% a detective control. Why? Well, it says it in the question. Your company has surveillance cameras installed at all entrances. The following footage was recorded. Footage is something that we would audit. We would look over it. If we're going to audit something, well, that's a detective control. We're going to investigate. When does a camera stop being a detective control and start being something else, right? Or a deterrent. I should say, when does a camera stop being a deterrent control and start being a detective control? When we have a guard there. When we record something, right? That's when. Otherwise, it becomes a detective control because we're logging it, we're videoing it. Okay. So if we have a security guard on-prem, then it's no longer a detective control. It's a different type of control. But in this case, we're viewing the security footage. That would be a detective control. There we go. All right, question number 18. The organization is conducting a risk assessment to identify and evaluate potential threats to its IT infrastructure. The following findings were documented. Which type of control is the process of conducting a risk assessment? What is the process of conducting a risk assessment? I feel like I'm supposed to have some logging here, and I must have forgot to bring it in, so my apologies. But we really don't need it. Really don't need it to answer this question. We'll be fine. What do you think? What do you think? I'll give you about 5 more seconds on this one. All right, your organization is conducting a risk assessment to identify and evaluate potential threats to its IT infrastructure. The following findings were documented. What type of control is the process of conducting a risk assessment? You can almost get rid of everything except for the final sentence. And I often say this with students, right? Read the question in its entirety, then read the possible answers, and then reread what is the question asking me. Don't answer what you think it's asking you. Answer what it is asking me. And this way, it's actually asking me what type of control is the process of conducting a risk assessment. That's what it's asking. Nothing else matters. It's only that last sentence. All right. So we have preventive, managerial, detective, and corrective. Let's start with preventive control. Is the risk assessment a preventive control? We can call that risk prevention a lot of time. So I would say maybe. Maybe on this one. Is it the best answer? Maybe. I'm going to put preventive control as a top two. Then we have managerial control. Risk assessment, administrative control, managerial control. We're actually filling out the risk assessment. We're conducting it. Definitely paperwork. But is it a managerial control or preventive control? I like managerial as well. I mean, that's very much a good answer. C, detective control. I think we know it's not a detective control. And I think we can rule out the corrective control as well. It really comes between A and B. A and B are going to be our top two. I'll give you 5 seconds to choose between A and B, just in case you got it wrong. All right. What type of control is the process of conducting a risk assessment? Well, it's 100%, without a shadow of a doubt, a managerial control. Administrative control. We're conducting a risk assessment. Conduction of a risk assessment is paperwork. Paperwork is managerial. That is an administrative control. While it may provide some preventive methodologies, it is still considered a managerial control, an administrative action to do it. That's going to be our answer. Managerial. All right, question number 19. 3 more questions left, and then we'll shut this down. Maybe I'll do some open Q&A afterwards, just in case. Just in case I have some people on here that want to answer me some questions. All right, number 19. Your organization displays the following banner on all login screens. What type of control is this? Warning, unauthorized access to the system is prohibited. We have corrective, deterrent, detective, and preventive. A, B, C, and D accordingly. I'll give you about 5 seconds on this one. I feel like this one's an easy one for most students. For most. I'm probably wrong, though. If I am, that's okay. All right, let's answer this one. Your organization displays the following banner on all login screens. What type of control is this? Unauthorized access to the system is prohibited. Corrective control. No, corrective control will be after the fact. In this case, nothing's happened. We're just logging in. It's not even logged in yet. It's before the login. So definitely can't be corrective. Deterrent control. Is it deterring users? Is it? Maybe. I would say B is a possible maybe. Detective control. Are we logging anything? It is at a login screen. It is a login screen, right? Because it follows the banner login screen. And detective control definitely provides those logs, right? Login screens provide logs. Yeah, we know that. I would go maybe on the detective side. D, preventive control. Is it preventing something? I would say that having the banner up there is not going to physically stop somebody from logging in. Not normally. So it really comes between B and C on this one. I'll give you about 5 seconds left. 5 seconds to think about this one. All right, if you said deterrent control, well, you'd be 100% correct. It's a sign. It's a sign. It tells us, hey, if you do this, if you log in, it's prohibited. There are repercussions to that. And so our goal is to deter people from doing something. Very much going to be a deterrent control. There we go. Deterrent. All right, question number 20. Question number 20. Your organization recently implemented a policy that requires all employees to immediately report any suspicious emails or potential phishing attempts to the IT security team. Failure to comply with this policy will result in disciplinary action. The objective is to ensure that employees are actively involved in detecting and responding to potential threats. What type of control does this policy represent? What type of control does this policy represent? I know I made the last 2 or 3 very difficult. I'm going to be honest with you. What do you think on this one? Remember, read the question, read the possible answers, managerial, preventive, detective, directive, and then read what the question is asking me. Reread what the question is asking me. That's why we answer CompTIA questions all the time. Remember, even on these long ones, we really don't want to spend more than 45 seconds. A minute tops on any question. If you are exceeding 45 seconds, you really need to just cut to the chase, pick an answer, and move on. You cannot spend more than a minute on a question. It is impossible. If you spend a minute, you're stealing from your PBQs, and PBQs are worth more points. They are. So if you don't know, guess and move on. Guess and move on. Right? Guess, flag, move on. That's our mantra. All right, I'm going to give you about 5 more seconds, and then we're going to answer this one. All right, very long question. Your organization recently implemented a policy that requires all employees to immediately report any suspicious emails or potential phishing attempts to the IT security team. Failure to comply with this policy will result in disciplinary action. The objective is to ensure employees are actively involved in detecting and responding to potential threats. What type of control is this policy? I think we can cut to the chase and get rid of preventive, and we can get rid of detective. I think that we know right off the bat, it's got to be a managerial or it's got to be a directive control. Is it directing me or is it telling me broadly? That's really the difference, because a directive control orders you to do something, right? It's telling you will do this. A policy or administrative control is broad scoped, and there's very, very thin line that separates between the two. And so, is it directing me to do something, or is it providing me a high level? Hey, this is what we need to do. In this case, it's providing me a high level. It's a managerial control. It's not a directive control. Directive control would be more concise. It would be like, you will do this. This is a policy that your manager is coming through, right? You will follow this policy. You will do this. You will go through and do X, right? Directive control almost isn't a policy, right? A directive control often refers back to a policy, but it will tell you this is what you're doing. In this case, we just have the policy. And if you look at the question, what type of control does this policy represent? That firmly places it in the administrative/managerial perspective. All right, question 21. Your organization is conducting quarterly risk assessments to identify potential vulnerabilities in its systems and to develop strategies to mitigate those risks. This process involves analyzing existing controls, evaluating potential threats, and recommending improvements to overall security posture. What type of control does this process exemplify? What type of control does this process exemplify? What do you think on this one? We'll give you about 10 seconds on this just to read it over. Remember, read the full question, which we did. Then read the answers, directive, managerial, or technical. And then reread what the question is asking me. What is it asking me? What I think it's asking me, what is it asking me? This is how we pass our CompTIA exams. All right, let's answer this one. What type of control does this process exemplify? Is it a directive control? Maybe. Is it a corrective control? No, it's not a corrective control. X didn't happen and we're doing something else. That's not what this is. Is it a managerial control? We kind of went over this already, but maybe. And it is a technical control? No, it's not. So is it a directive or is it a managerial control? That is really the top two. And I see so many students struggle with this. So this is why I made these so difficult. Is it a directive or a managerial? Well, it's a managerial. It's another managerial. Why? What type of control does this process exemplify? I'm not being directed to do something. It's asking about the process itself, process and policies, managerial, administrative control. That's going to be it. That's going to be our answers. All right, I lied. I don't have a question 22. We only have 21 questions. All right, I know I've got some people in chat. Do you guys have any questions for me, or should I cut this short? This is your opportunity to ask me anything you want. Anything you want. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds as we cut through. I can always edit out the 30 seconds. We don't have any questions. What do you think? I feel like these domain questions, right? This was domain 1.1, which if you go through the different Security Plus domains, it's the very first one. The very first one. I don't know. Did you find this helpful? There was a lot more questions than we normally do. A lot more questions than we normally do. All right. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in chat, so we're going to cut this short. You guys have a good one. We'll see you next time on Dr. K. Have a good one.